Hello, all, everybody at my Patreon account. This is Mr. Spock, and I'm wearing the proper Spock gear, as you can see. I'd like to welcome every Patreon member this month. You are the first 5 that decided to join me. I wanted to make a little community for everyone so we can have a place to talk and share about ideas that relate to just about everything that we're experiencing in this modern world. This can range from quantum biology to all kinds of psychology, the conventional wisdom we think we're being told. That's actually a lot of things going on under the scenes, behind the scenes, around the scenes. You know what I mean? So today I just want to take some questions, and actually I might even just focus this entire Q&A on one question because it's such a big, giant question. And so if you are like knights and rulers of the castle, you get this video every month, so you know. And you can just ask away, just ping me your questions over the course of a month. I will continue to answer them. Right now, like I said, this first question I have is such a doozy that I'll probably be talking about it for a good 15 minutes. So just continue to ask away, and here we go. So this, about a week ago, Bruno, one of our members, he was asking, what do you recommend as introduction reading material on how EMFs work with our biology in our body, right? So he did post a book, and I'll go ahead and I don't know if I'll share the book that he posted. Maybe I will. I'll do a screen share here so you can see it. Share my screen here. I think this is the correct one. Okay. So if you can see this, he looked at this book here, Applied Bioelectricity from Electrical Stimulation to Electropathology. This is actually a semi-decent book to be looking at, but really the fundamentals related to this electrical stimulation. This is we can get into a little bit of this right away on a background. So in bioelectricity, we have a pulsed DC electrical grid really around our bodies with all of our meridians. A lot of people think of them as acupuncture points, but there's a lot more to that, just deeper into every cell in our body, right? Our mitochondria have a 30 million volt gradient on the inner membrane of the mitochondrial layer in there, in the inner membrane. And of course, it makes sense that this voltage gradient inside the mitochondria is that big because when you condense things really down into really tight spaces, like the mitochondria, and you look at the scale at that point, when you redo the math and refigure everything, you can get this voltage gradient really high when you're dealing with little tiny spaces. So that's how they can pretty much, like in the literature and just in the scientific literature, how they come up with these crazy huge numbers. Because if you think about it, a lightning bolt is somewhere around that range, I think it's 24 million volts when it strikes, something really high like that. So I also know that if looking at the energy production in the mitochondria, right, it's going through and trying to produce this more constant rate of energy all the time to generate ATP. And some of this, some cells you can expect to have a little higher voltage potential. Other cells that are not working correctly are going to have a lower energy output. So looking at humans as electrical beings or bioelectrical beings, from that perspective, we have to start thinking about the entire scale of what's happening across the body, not only with what I previously mentioned with this pulse DC system built into us that Robert O. Becker discovered, Bruno, you might even know, like, when looking at here, you might already know about Becker. I don't know if you do, but Becker was pretty much I think he was an orthopedic surgeon out of on the East Coast, and did a lot of his work like through the 1960s and part of the 1970s, and became pretty famous then, and then really understood the risks we have from our modern environments, like back then from the lower power systems. And really Becker pushed this movement in around the mid 1970s to tell people about, you know, being near power lines, especially the high voltage power lines. So there was like correlations back then between like childhood leukemia and kids being in places where higher voltage power lines were, and that's the time industry was also pushing through the high voltage power lines in through more residential and commercial areas, closer exposures, and also through farmlands. And there's a lot of complaints from farmers that their, you know, like their cows and their dairy and their goats, you know, all their animals weren't producing what they should. They also had this foot problems on their animals developing, and other conditions coming out of that as well. When a lot of their animals spent time like right under the structures of those high voltage power lines out in the fields. So going back into like what books to think about, like about bioelectricity, definitely anything like this applied bioelectricity is a great start, because, you know, it does get into pretty much how the systems work, but like going back a level to Becker, it definitely is. So I brought with me here, let me unscreen share this. Let's see, I can't see it. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, I have here The Body Electric. Hopefully you have this book. He also did a later book that gets into the pros and cons of using like PEMF, which is pulsed EMF technologies. He envisioned back right at the turn of the century, of the 21st century, he envisioned that people could be using like ways to stimulate the DC electric current in the body if regeneration pathways were not, uh, you know, they were not happening, or they were being blocked by other sources of like non-native EMFs. So that's why this question you asked is a pretty big one, because there's a lot of background into um, how these systems work, thinking about the scales of like all the way down into the mitochondria, then up a level to the cellular layer, then up a level again into the tissue layer, and then different systems interwoven in our body, like the cardiovascular system. This gets into hydration, because the dielectric constant in water, where it is in your body, and especially in your blood, can change. And then you go a system higher, like up into organs, and like just looking at the brain, right? The brain is an electrical organ, and your heart is an electrical organ. And so to not recognize that and it is kind of silly. Like there are people, like a lot of anesthesiologists and doctors and surgeons and people out there that use EKGs. You know, they understand very well that we're very electrical, and there would be, if we didn't care about an EKG, right? Like we would never have an EKG. We'd never be using one like right before surgery, you know, to like monitor what the patient's doing. This, you know, the heart rate, the brain waves, all these things wouldn't be necessary if we're still living and didn't have electrical systems in us. So it's very interesting that we really, as a society, and the entire world has been so focused on just the things in life, the the biochemistry, just the chemical makeup of who we are, just the genetics, right? Like it's the mantra is like, it's all about DNA, it's all about this, when DNA itself is like a fractal that is almost a conduit for electricity, like through that. Our proteins are designed in certain ways for electricity. And when we think about how electrical impulses are delivered, we have light and energy always in this kind of like this nice duality together. Thinking of it this way, like the interchangeability of, E equals mc squared, we have this mass equivalence formula telling us that light, energy, and mass are all different types of the same thing. So to like really focus on the mass and not really think about the energy and light and how that's all working, we lose a lot of the knowledge we normally would have been considering. So a fundamental book to consider, and I'm going to just go ahead and type this into Amazon so you can see it, but this is a book by Roland Van Wyk. I've bought this book, a couple years ago. This is the book. You don't see it now, but I'm going to do a screen share so you can. All right. Here we go. So with this screen share, you should see this: Light in Shaping Life, Biophotons in Biology and Medicine. So this book, even though it doesn't, there's not a lot of, like, people would look at this and not think energy, this book really is telling us about how light and energy both are like interacting and in their duality together, and why light is really fundamental to energy. So when we think about energy and like our DC circuit and how all this works, our DC circuit is really a synonym for what we call electromagnetic energy, or EE. I'll go ahead and unscreen share this so you can see my beautiful Spock shirt for the next few more minutes here. All right, so electrical energy, or EE, is also more or less a synonym for biophotons. So in our body, like in different places, we can actually, with a photomultiplier, we can measure the output of light, right? And light at different wavelengths in certain places in our body at certain times with circadian timing. So how our body is using light and the emission of it is telling us also about how energy flow works in the body as well. So it's like you can't like separate light from the energy from the mass, right? They're all interconnected. They're all working as this giant piece of this puzzle in life. So when we really want to study how energy is working in the body, it's really important to also study how light is working in the body, how we take in and absorb light, and how we emit light as biophotons. Now, the emission of this energy and biophoton light is really, really, really small amounts. But when you have a machine that can calculate, you can start seeing some of this. So there's also another resource that is similar to this, which is pretty cool, which is called Heart Math. They're an institution that they've been around for over a few decades, and they also look at the fields, like the EMF fields, natural fields that we generate, and that's pretty cool, because then you can start looking around at like the Heart Math articles and research papers that they've done, showing like how our fields are generated from our different systems, our different organs. So it turns out, as you may know this already, but it turns out your heart can be detected like with a photomultiplier, and these are really weak EMF fields, but you can detect them out away from a living organism. So from a human, you can detect the heart out like roughly, I think it's around 10 feet, something like that. You can definitely detect it within like 6 feet away from the body. And then like the brain, you would think that because it's so electrical, the brain, you would be able to detect a field around it maybe even farther than your heart, but it's kind of not that way. Your brain is pulled in more, and I think it goes out to roughly 3 to 5 feet that they detect it out to on average. So like a lot of that is really interesting, because as we're dynamically at any given moment in time emitting light and generating energy, we're creating these fields out from our body at different points around our different organs. So we can almost think of our organs as the shape and how they're even like built as their shape, as these ways that they can, generate this energy, but also produce like fields around the shape of what these things are. And of course, the timing of all of it, like when we're in our sleeping state versus our waking state and this sort of stuff. So I would really recommend getting your hands on Light and Shaping Life, although it's a very expensive book. When I bought it, I think it was around 150. I think it might be even higher now. Let me just go ahead and see for you guys how much that's priced at. But it's actually better. I see a copy of it for 104 on here. There's another couple places for 151. So obviously I have to get my Zoom screen back on for you guys. Okay, so obviously I've talked about light, energy. I would personally start with Light and Shaping Life if you don't know much about the mitochondria, because it goes into that as well. Like it goes into this really nice history about how we got, like how we're measuring things with these biophotons, but it goes into all these other related aspects of life and intersects a little bit with Robert Becker's stuff. There's not much on EMF in it though. So if you're more looking for like how do my regeneration pathways work in the body, how I can grow bone, how cellular cycles are functioning, this sort of stuff, definitely like Becker's works. He has like cross currents and the body electric. If you're looking for more for like specific light, books on light as well, John Ott's books are really good. There's a book called just Light and Health. It goes through kind of his experiences, but what he discovered about when he uses specific frequencies of light on like the plants that he grew in greenhouses versus like just more natural light, like sunlight. And then all of these links back to health, to like human health, with the omission of frequencies or the color balance with frequencies, this sort of stuff. It's pretty amazing work. And then if most people are not aware of this, like there's many benefits to natural UV, different UV frequencies, and as you know, like generation of vitamin D, but there's also a lot of benefits to infrared, different red light infrared sources, because mitochondrial function is very dependent upon these frequencies in certain band ranges. And this is where we actually go deeper into a water story. So there's another book that was written back in 2011, I believe, called The Fourth Phase of Water, and that's by Gerald Pollack. And water actually takes on different forms that you would not expect when you actually shoot light at water. It can form different things against different tissues within our body. So like if you have what's called a phospholipid bilayer, like a fatty cell membrane, and you shoot water against that, you can build this gradient, an electrical gradient, with the water the water forms this gradient with certain light inputs, which is more of your there's a lot of frequencies that can build it, but especially those red light frequencies can build it. And then once this lattice is formed, it can actually absorb other types of frequencies. So there's so much like interwoven amazingness that's in like these biological systems that it kind of requires like the understanding of like all these different parts to really get into like, okay, energy in the body, in this tissue, because there is or is not a gradient of water, and what is the dielectric constant of water, and what's going on with the energy generation in that water. This tells a bigger story about just how everything is working in its little specific place, even on different scales, right? So that's where I think I'm going to not end it, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about now the non-native EMF frequencies that are just out there in our modern world. So with what you have is, like if you think of the non-native, like I was talking about a little earlier with Becker, the lower frequencies, like the 50 or 60 hertz frequencies that's on our power grid, like that are literally on my head here coming through, but luckily there's a buffer, right? There's a quick square root fall off with the electric fields and magnetic fields, but these tissues, right around my ears, are experiencing a different frequency because I have it so close to these mitochondrial tissues. So in thinking about how the electrical energy and the pulse DC system that's built into us that Becker discovered, this stuff is, and the biophotons, these are all very ultra weak intensities, way more weaker than the EMF that we're experiencing all around us. Even with this square root fall off on my ears, I would still be experiencing these other frequencies, even though my body's using frequencies that are far less intense than these frequencies that are just around us in our environment. So it's very much, I think, foolish to believe that if we're using ultra weak frequencies for our regeneration pathways and other signaling systems in our bodies, that being exposed to these frequencies that are more intense to our biology, to believe that they don't have any influence on us is very foolish. And we also know from a lot of the more modern research and hypotheses and theories that are being developed and everything in the science that the non-native, like typically either the lower frequencies like from the power grid, or the higher frequencies from microwave radiation or from radio frequency, which are almost synonyms of each other. Just the way we define these things are like has morphed and changed a little bit over like decades, but pretty much RF, like radio frequency, like encompasses now in the terminology like this broad range of bands, right? Of like even down into the kilohertz, is kind of where it breaks off and becomes more lower frequencies. Like the kilohertz are kind of like the mid-range frequencies. The megahertz and gigahertz are the higher frequencies. Once you get into the gigahertz, you're really in the microwave band. And when you're down into the megahertz, you're still there, but at the lower side of the megahertz is typically where we look and we can see like radio stations. So we call it radio frequency, right, for terminology, or even lower into kilohertz for the AM bands and so forth. And you go way down into the low frequencies, down into the power grid stuff. And some of the harmonics and transients generated off of those lower frequencies can actually get higher and higher, even make their way up into the higher frequencies. Anyways, all of these ways we produce as humans, these artificial frequencies, they're not like this, their waveforms are definitely not normal to biology compared to the natural frequencies of the earth and the sun that help actually provide rhythms and cycles to help our regeneration pathways. So that's why the blue light, like the really super high frequencies up into the visible light spectrum, we know that blue light itself can be damaging and suppress melatonin. And when we think about this and we think about blue light, it's very, like, be very cautious to think about how the blue light is being generated. Is this being generated from a natural source, or is it being generated and actually manipulated through our power grid, right? As a more erratic or interesting, different form of blue light. And it is, because the blue light that we get off the power grid is more chopped up because of the AC flicker that's being produced based on this hertz, right? The 60 hertz or 50 hertz power grid when you have the lighting system on. So if you were to take a camera and slow down the camera at a very slow speed, you could start seeing this flicker, and that our eyes, that our minds don't perceive, but our eyes actually do perceive a flicker effect, as to why I have these blue blockers that I'm wearing through this whole video on. So it's wise when we think about also the, like, even past blue light, like when we go even higher frequencies into the ultraviolet, because they are more powerful and they can bump out electrons more and they can do all this stuff. But when we get it from the sun, it's quite, it's I like to make this analogy comparison. It's like when you get really pure natural food from your environment versus eating something artificial that's been through all of these other things. It's like the food is more dead, right? When you eat it, when it's artificial, and it's more living when it's not, because meaning your body can use these frequencies for a benefit, not just if you get too much of it, right? It could be a problem on the other side too, with just the dose size that you're getting. Like if I'm not acclimated to really powerful sunlight, like if I take a trip down to the tropics, 15-20 minutes of high intensity sunlight will burn my skin. Obviously that's going to cause a lot of oxidative stress. That's not wise to do. It's better to like build up your body over time. Only makes sense to, and we all know this, to get a suntan, and then we don't burn as much and your body can adapt and work with it, and then gain the benefits out of this particular input, in this case UVB with IR frequencies to generate vitamin D, which is super powerful free radical scavenger that helps life. It's an anti-cancer agent, right? So just taking this orally, the version you're getting taking it orally versus making it and producing it where you need it in your body is like there's no comparison. It's like a lot of the epidemiology recently has even showed similar, like what I just said, like a lot of studies, when people take the vitamin D supplement, they're not seeing many benefit, like they're seeing some beneficial effects, but nothing in comparison to like the vitamin D you get from sunlight. So I guess to like think about these EMF, the non-native EMFs in this sense. So if I'm continuously exposing my body to these things, especially considering time of day, what your body's expecting, it only makes sense that this can have influences on your regeneration pathways. Like, um, go ahead and ramp yourself up in that, like Becker stuff, because when you understand that, like, your eyes need a certain frequency of regeneration versus your gallbladder versus your liver, like the different frequencies there and at the time of day matter at which can help regenerate those cells at those frequencies. Your brain even relaxes too, right? I mean, you're up here 40, 60, 80 hertz when you're really alive and awake. But when you go back down into your sleeping state and your alpha waves, I mean, it really comes back down into like the 12, 10, 7 hertz range. Even it can even go deeper if you go into a deeper meditation state. So where we are in the frequency range in the certain organs in the body really have an impact on how we think about what stimulus is happening, and then what systems are being active and involved in all this. I guess I'll leave it there. There's probably going to be a lot of questions about this. If you're on EMF Warriors, that's great because you're going to get a lot of EMF information there from, what might need to be done to your local environment, your micro environment, right? Like where I'm at right now in my room, I have like I'm sitting in a specific spot always to like minimize my EMF exposures. I only know what I'm getting because I'm actually measuring them, right? But at the same time, what's more important to me is making sure my sleep is really right on. I'm getting really good deep sleep because I want that melatonin. Melatonin interacts with your cells, it helps your cell cycles. It's like super important, and not getting it as an exogenous, outward source. You want to get this as a endogenous and internal generation, just similar to like, you get hit with light in the daytime to produce vitamin D. At night, you don't want to be hit with light, so you're not suppressing your melatonin. And that actually even goes deeper into these EMFs, because EMF is like part of the EM spectrum, a form of light. And if your body can feel that you're around light frequencies, then it might be overstimulated. It might be, creating more inflammation, or it could be suppressing more melatonin. And actually, that melatonin suppression has been in scientific papers I've read on PubMed. I mean, this goes, I've read ones from the 1990s where they knew that melatonin suppression was possible with magnetic fields. And magnetic fields are lower EMF, they're like 60 hertz. So it's not just the microwave part of the spectrum that's a problem. It's the entire part of the spectrum and the time of day, because we want to sleep like right in darkness. We don't want to be sleeping around all these extra frequencies that can be activating these systems and not putting our bodies into a regenerative state. So that's my take on it. From a lot of the books and mitochondrial books and chronobiology books and stuff I've been reading over the years, and it's ongoing. It never stops. Like there's always new stuff to be learned and new pathways and new discoveries that we're just morphing and shaping all this to try to make sense of how all these things intersect. So I will leave it there for now, and hope you guys push in more questions. If you have any other friends that want to join here, tell them what I'm doing, that I'm another resource for you. I can do like this. I can start pushing you in the directions of the different books I've read over the years if you want to get into it. And yeah, like I'm all up ears for you guys too. Like if you find something that you think I should be reading because you find it intriguing, it could be like a little off the normal topic of things. That's totally cool too, because I'm just looking to continuously expand what I know and help people out, just share things and just become like like another social media group with people that are on my Patreon that really want to get to know what they might be missing as part of what I might have discovered, and vice versa. Like if you might have discovered aspects that really I could dig into, go for it. Let me know. All right, cool guys. Thanks a bunch. See you next month.